Chapter 535. The yellow sand stretched for thousands of miles. Dunhuang had formed a circle, creating a paradise for 70 to 80,000 people. The snow-white night jade lion did not go through the south gate, but instead went to the north gate. Su Fengnian knew that according to the layout of Dunhuang, going through the north gate was like going through the black tortoise into the imperial palace. However, Sweet Potato was meticulous and had taken root in Dunhuang for many years. Su Fengnian was happy to go along with the host and did not say much. As they approached the north gate, Sweet Potato dismounted and said that he would lead the horse into the city. Su Fengnian did not agree and dismounted together to walk. Sweet Potato insisted on taking the bookcase and carrying it on his back. One on the left and one on the right, they walked towards the north gate. There were 2 rows of strong armored guards with halberds in their hands. They were all ceremonial embroidered halberds. Seeing Sweet Potato in embroidered robes, they knelt down without saying a word. There were more than 100 people kneeling down. Su Fengnian was confused. After passing through the gate, his vision suddenly opened up. Just as the tide-listening pavilion had described, the giant palace at the northern end of Dunhuang had been split into 2 for some reason in recent years. Its geographical location was very clear. It was divided into 2 palaces, east and west. The Yeting Palace in the east and the Purple Golden Palace in the west. Su Fengnian followed Sweet Potato and led the horse westward. The ground beneath his feet was paved with thick white jade slices made of fine suet jade. In front of a heavy palace door that was slowly opening, Su Fengnian deliberately squatted down to touch it. Behind the vermilion door, the pretty palace maids in wide-sleeved red and green gowns widened their eyes when they saw this scene. They seemed to be surprised that this young foreigner was so tacky and unworldly. Su Fengnian got up and could not help but ask softly, "Are you the Castellan's confidant or a small leader in the Purple Golden Palace?" Sweet Potato answered with a straight face, "Both?" Su Fengnian did not say anything else. Dunhuang's power was complicated. These soldiers and palace maids were not very clean. The more they spoke, the more likely they would make mistakes. Passing through corridors and aisles, Sweet Potato gave the night jade lion to the palace maids to send to the stables. Next they arrived at the inner court palace. They stopped at a plaque hanging from Qing Li Zhai. Sweet Potato pushed the door open and chuckled, "Young master, are you not afraid that I will betray you and bring you into Dunhuang?" Su Fengnian dismissed it with a smile and walked into the room. He was stunned for a moment. It was actually the same layout as the Wudong Garden of the Northern Liang Prince's mansion. There was a sense of familiarity with the elegant furnishings, porcelain bottles, incense burners, and the 4 treasures on the desk. Su Fengnian reached out to touch a large pouch filled with crystal balls and white chrysanthemums. His fingers then touched the large red sandalwood table with carved dragons. Sweet Potato seemed to have a great sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. She looked at Su Fengnian's side profile and whispered in a sweet voice, "Young master has returned home." Seeing her young master's puzzled face, Sweet Potato no longer kept Su Fengnian in suspense. She put down the bookcase and pulled Su Fengnian to the couch by the window to lie down. She spoke tirelessly, "The lord of the city is this servant's aunt." She sat on this position with the secret support of Bailiang Palace. This servant was originally sent to Wudong Garden with a status similar to that of a hostage. However, Wang Fei treated me like her own daughter and taught me martial arts. On the other hand, this servant was not very close to aunt, and also had a hard life. She was originally a concubine of the Beimeng Palace and was framed by Empress Murongshi. That was why she lost the battle for favor and lost the position of empress. However, the late Yelu Emperor had a secret posthumous edict that forbade Murongshi, who was the empress at that time, from killing aunt. He also asked aunt to ensure her safety for the rest of her life. Aunt's family declined and she only brought this servant with her to become homeless. Although her life was not in danger, she had experienced many hardships. At that time there were many rumors and slanders, which were not all nonsense. Later on, when she met the great general and Wang Fei at the border, her luck changed. In addition, when Tuoba was young, he did receive aunt's favor. After he became the king of the northern courtyard who was in charge of half the country's military, he had a lot of protection for Dunhuang City. There were some things that went beyond the rules in the city, and the Beimeng Palace had no choice but to turn a blind eye to it. Sweet Potato sat cross-legged with Su Fengnian resting his head on her lap. She untied the hairband that tied his hair and combed his hair. Su Fengnian closed his eyes and asked, "Your aunt?" Sweet Potato said calmly, "A few years ago the great demon Luo Yang passed by Dunhuang City. Aunt fought with him and died after a year. At that time Luo Yang was going to enter the city and massacre the city. Ant divided the giant immortal palace and gave the Yeting Palace to this demon as his temporary residence. She racked her brains to invite a peerless Buddha for Dunhuang City. Dunhuang City benefited from the disaster. Even the Beimeng Empress stopped many of her infiltrations and even withdrew Zhu Yan's forces. Although Luo Yang was the Yeting Palace master in name, he did not show up in these years. After Ant died, her funeral was kept a secret and I became the palace master of the Purple Gold Palace. Ant left behind her last words. When Luo Yang moved into the Yeting Palace, it meant that she had a backer. Only then did I ascend the throne and announce her death. Su Fengyin frowned. During the trip to Beimeng, the famous demon Luo Yang's reputation was like thunder to his ears. Su Fengyin opened his eyes and asked, "Who is this Luo Yang?" Sweet Potato shook his head and said, "No matter how the various powers of Northern Meng investigated, they couldn't find any traces of him. I heard from my aunt that this young man has the appearance of a woman. However, although his brows and eyes are somewhat charming, he has a valiant temperament. He's even better than the young Tuoba Bodhisattva. He likes to wear white clothes and doesn't use weapons." However, there was a rumor that several stunning women had appeared around Luo Yang and were treated as his exclusive property. Among them there was no lack of daughters of noble families. At that time, Dunhuang City had also sent a young beauty whose beauty could topple a city. Luo Yang's fishing habits should be true. Su Fengyin held Sweet Potato's hand that was caressing his cheek and subconsciously rubbed it. He asked, "Will this Luo Yang have evil thoughts when he sees you?" Sweet Potato smiled and said, "This servant's beauty is probably not enough to enter his eyes." Su Fengyin scolded, "Bullsh *T." Sweet Potato lowered her head and stared into his red phoenix eyes. Her breath smelled like orchids as she whispered, "Young master, after 3 years of traveling, I heard you tell me that only those who eat too much sweet potato will fart. You haven't even eaten a sweet potato yet." Su Fengyin's eyes suddenly widened. Sweet Potato's unruly hand touched his waist and went straight to the root of the problem. He looked into her beautiful face. Her eyes were like silk and her eyebrows were full of lust. However, the bottom of her eyes could not hide the shyness of a young woman. Su Fengyin did not know whether to laugh or cry. "How much courage do you have to do such a thing? Playing little tricks with a womanizer like me, in the end you are the one who is at a disadvantage." Su Fengyin was not embarrassed by his little brother's uncontrollable hostility. On the other hand, Sweet Potato, who had secretly looked at a few erotic pictures with Green Ant and the others, did not know how to end it. Being stared at by Su Fengyin, Sweet Potato blushed and did not know what to do. Su Fengyin saw that her eyes and cheeks were almost dripping with tears. He did not want to embarrass her any further. He smiled and said, "Stop fooling around. I'm going to take a bath first and then have a good sleep. I won't be taking care of the sword today. I'll have a good rest. When I wake up naturally we can talk about other things." Sweet Potato felt as if she had been pardoned. When she bent down to put on her embroidered shoes, Su Fengyin slapped her especially plump and bouncy buttocks. He teased, "You don't know, but on this trip to Beimeng I was constantly being teased by women. I even slapped a woman's buttocks in a border town. But she wasn't as pretty as you. Her face was 10 streets away from yours. Only her breasts could be compared to yours, but her buttocks were far from yours." Sweet Potato, who had evil intentions but no guts, fled in panic. Half an hour later, Sweet Potato led Su Fengyin to a side room. There was a bathtub made of yellow rosewood that was filled with mist. It was steaming hot. Even though there were no petals, the fragrance of the bathtub assailed his nostrils. Su Fengyin glanced at Sweet Potato, who had taken off her brocade gown and was only wearing undergarments. This was the gift of this first-class maidservant of Wudong Garden. Every early spring, her fragrance could even attract bees and butterflies. The scene of a woman walking with butterflies fluttering around her was too wonderful for words. The scholar officials were addicted to precious jade figurines and the like, but compared to her national beauty and heavenly fragrance, they were not even worth mentioning. Sweet Potato helped him take off his clothes. She was familiar with these chores and was the only personal maidservant in Bailiang Palace. She was only one step away from becoming a Tongfang. Thus, she was also the first person to see Su Fengyin naked. Only when she was not around would the green ants do it for her. Every time, the latter would want nothing more than to close her eyes in embarrassment. Su Fengyin looked at Sweet Potato, who seemed to be possessed by green ants. He smiled and asked, "You were different in the past. Is it because you're so close to home? What, you only know how to be shy now?" Chapter 536. Su Fengyin walked into the bathtub and Sweet Potato skillfully wiped his body. It was a long time since he felt so comfortable. Sweet Potato saw a scar on his waist that hadn't faded even after the great yellow courtyard. It was a ghastly sight, and her lips trembled. Su Fengyin, who was enjoying himself with his eyes closed, said calmly, "I was unlucky. Tuoba Chun-sun brought 2 great devils to surround me. After I escaped, I was struck by Duambwa Erwi's thunder spear while I was hunting." Sweet Potato remained silent. Her body was pressed against the wooden wall of the bathtub, and her head rested on Su Fengyin's shoulder. She asked softly, "It's not good to stand outside the tub. Do you want me to come in?" Su Fengyin nodded. She didn't take off her thin clothes. She half squatted in the spacious bathtub, and her technique was delicate. Her clothes were soaked, and it didn't make much difference whether she wore them or not. At this moment, it seemed that wearing more clothes would make her even more charming. When Sweet Potato swam behind him like a plump koi and touched the large patch of fine scars on his back, Su Fengyin laughed softly. "Not long ago, I fought with the devil Shui Songguan and broke 2 of her zither strings. She had the 18 beats of the Hujia, which made me suffer a lot. Now that I think about it, I still have lingering fears. Sure enough, when I see those rare finger shen experts, I still have to take a detour. At first, I thought that since she jumped into the finger shen realm, her combat power should be about the same as Duambwa Erwi's. I thought that she could try to fight with them, but I was wrong. In terms of the 3 sects, there seemed to be no difference between the 3 realms. However, in Jianghu, the difference of 1 realm still made a world of difference. Sweet Potato, what realm are you in?" Sweet Potato rubbed Su Fengyin's chest. Her eyes were blurred, her body trembled, and her voice trembled. "I'm both a fake Vajra and a fake finger shen. It's enough to kill ordinary people." Su Fengyin smelled the natural fragrance of dragon saliva and ancient sandalwood. He said, "It's about time." Sweet Potato nodded and took the lead to get up and leave the bathtub. She carefully wiped her hands with a silk cloth, and then she picked up a pile of clean clothes. On top of it was a purple robe of exquisite craftsmanship. It was the purple robe of the imperial family of the Central Plains. Su Fengyin walked out of the bathtub and walked closer to take a closer look. He said in surprise, "Is this the python robe of the Southern Tang Imperial Weaving Bureau? How did it came to Dunhuang City?" Sweet Potato smiled and said, "When the scholars of the Central Plains fled to the north, one of the leaders of the Weaving Bureau secretly hid this python robe and sold it for profit to an influential official in Dunhuang. The latter gave it to my aunt as a gift. In fact, there were 2 robes. The robe in my hand was originally intended to be given to a prince by the king of Southern Tang, so it fits you perfectly. The other robe is a yellow robe that is relatively small and delicate. It's more suitable for me to wear, but it's too tight for you to wear. Try it on." Su Fengyin didn't refuse either. In northern Mang, forget about wearing a fallen nation's python robe. Even if he were to wear the Zhao family's Son of Heaven's dragon robe in private, no one would be so bored as to impeach him. Under Sweet Potato's service, he put on the purple robe of the imperial family of the Southern Tang and put on the purple gold crown. There were 2 brocade ribbons on both sides of the crown that hung down to his arms. Standing in front of a large bronze mirror with a red sandalwood frame, Sweet Potato's eyes were intoxicated. She said in a daze, "It's a pity young master didn't become an emperor." Su Fengyin laughed. "You've tried it. You still have to sleep. Don't waste this robe. You should change your clothes too." After taking off the robe, Su Fengyin went to his room and fell asleep. Sweet Potato walked over and sat on the bed. She listened to the soft snoring and felt sad. Before traveling he had never snored. How tired must he be to be like this? Laying down on her side, Sweet Potato gazed at the serene face that was just inches away from her. She whispered, "Gongzi, you're mine now. You're mine alone. I'm not greedy. Even if it's just for 1 day, it's fine." Day and night in Dunhuang were like 2 seasons. The day was as hot as the summer, and the night was as cold as the late autumn. When Su Fengyin woke up, he was the only one in the room. He put on his boots and felt a little hungry. He went to the desk and picked up a bell and shook it a few times. A palace maid came over slowly. Su Fengyin ordered in the language of the Southern Tang, "Bring me a few pieces of sweet potatoes." The palace maid seemed to understand, but she also seemed to not understand. She did not dare to ask too much. She just thought that she had met a strange guest. She went to get a plate and brought back a few pieces of sweet potatoes. Su Fengyin waved his hand to signal her to leave. He then carried a pile of books to the outside of the courtyard. He first lit the freshly cut branches and dug a small hole. Only then did he start to roast the sweet potatoes. The new branches were wet and were not suitable for roasting. This was what old Huang had taught him in the past. Su Fengyin sat on a small embroidered stool and nibbled on a red heart sweet potato. He turned his head and saw the woman who was about to cry. She could be considered the Empress of Dunhuang. He heard her sobbing, "Young master, is this what you meant by eating sweet potatoes? You didn't keep your word." Su Fengyin opened his mouth wide. He was speechless. Sweet Potato had obviously dressed up. She was charming. Now that she was weeping, she was even more attractive. Su Fengyin said helplessly, "What's the rush?" It said that only when one is full and warm can one have the strength to think about one's desires. "Can't I eat sweet potatoes before eating them? You're too unreasonable." Sweet Potato smiled through her tears. Su Fengyin carried a few pieces of sweet potatoes into the room and handed one to her. Sweet Potato shook her head. Su Fengyin said softly as he ate, "When I was traveling, every time I ate a roasted sweet potato, I would think that when I got home I would definitely change your name. Red musk, etc. How could it be more pleasing than sweet potatoes? Holding it to warm your hands, eating it to warm your stomach, and thinking about how it can also warm your heart, right?" Sweet Potato's face was red. A woman dressed up for her bosom friend. Previously she had spent a lot of time putting on makeup, but it was worth it. A woman undressed for her bosom friend. Previously, when she wore beautiful and complicated clothes, she also liked it. Perhaps it was because they were too close and had been together for too long, but when Sweet Potato's clothes were taken off, Su Fengyin realized how good she was. It was beyond his imagination. Beneath him was a piece of mutton fat jade that emitted a sweet fragrance. A gentleman's virtue was like jade, and a woman's body was like jade. His fingers touched every inch of her body. Her body was sensitive and trembled incessantly. Like a fish in a pond caught in the crossfire, the pair of large twin peaks shook stubbornly. When he went down, it was muddy. Sweet Potato held her face with both hands, not daring to look at others. She also tried to suppress the soft moans that overflowed from her throat and mouth. Su Fengyin leaned over and bit her earlobe, whispering, "Do you want to end the bitterness and enjoy the sweetness?" Sweet Potato pulled his head down and squeezed it between her breasts. Every moment of the night was worth 1,000 gold. It was a pleasure between a man and a woman. However, for a woman, the first time was usually painful and unbearable. There was no physical pleasure to speak of. As for those who became more courageous the night they had their first taste, in Su Fengyin's opinion, they were either heroines or heroines. It was almost impossible. However, Sweet Potato, whose limbs were as taut as bowstrings, seemed to be at the peak of pleasure. The psychological pleasure clearly far overshadowed the pain. She no longer hid and stared hard at Su Fengyin, who was working on top of her. Her face was as red as a peach. Her legs and hands were wrapped around his slender body. Her fine black hair was scattered on the pillow, which set off her white and plump body. When Su Fengyin lay motionless on top of her, she licked his face with her nimble little tongue and asked provocatively, "Young master, are you okay? Don't ask such a question. Young master, whip this servant to your heart's content. Don't take pity on me. I'll definitely fulfill your wish." Every moment was worth 1,000 gold. By now he had probably spent a few thousand gold. After the second time he didn't feel tired. The woman under him was dripping with fragrant sweat, but there was still no sign of begging for mercy. Gradually they were getting better. "Young master, this is the third time. This servant is really going to die. Now you know what it means to be in a state of ecstasy hovering between life and death? Come on, turn over." The woman was weeping and complaining, her charming eyes like silk. "Young master, this position is embarrassing." There were no more words, only the sound of panting. Su Fengyin was like an old ox diligently plowing the fields. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore and made a gesture of turning over and dismounting. The two sides looked at each other. Su Fengyin saw the messy finger marks on her chest. He held a plump bamboo shoot that was upside down in front of her chest and asked somewhat guiltily, "Does it hurt?" Sweet Potato asked in return, "Is young master tired?" Su Fengyin didn't puff himself up at his own cost. His 5 fingers slightly tightened and he exhaled a long breath. "Do you really think I'm invincible?" Sweet Potato murmured. Her head tilted back slightly and she stuck a finger into her mouth. Su Fengyin laughed and scolded, "You finally know what a disaster is." She suddenly sat up and put on her clothes. She said, "Young master, wait a moment." Su Fengyin didn't know what was going on. He could only turn around and lie down on his side. He watched as she opened a secret room, walked in and came out a moment later. Su Fengyin was dumbfounded. She put on a golden dragon robe. Under the golden robe was a scene of emptiness. Sweet Potato didn't walk to the big bed. Instead, she walked to the small couch by the window. She put her hands on the couch and bent over to turn her head. Then, she lifted her robe with one hand and smiled charmingly at young master. Su Fengyin muttered to himself, "Let me just die." Chapter 537. Sweet Potato recalled for a moment and said slowly, "Generally speaking, the famous devils of northern Mang like to travel alone, and they won't take the initiative to fall out with the forces of the imperial court. Generally speaking, they will mind their own business. Plus, the laws of northern Mang are relatively lax, so there are very few cases of head-on confrontations. The reason why that devil fought with his life on the line wasn't because he was stubborn, but because Auntie had personally brought along a few martial arts experts to prevent him from escaping. Dunhuang City has 80,000 to 90,000 people. The soldiers guarding the city are called the Jianghu cavalry. They are all light cavalry, armed with short knives and light crossbows. They are not careless in night battles and street battles. Half of them are outside the giant immortal palace, and the other half are outside the city. Among them there are 40 to 50 people who came from Jianghu. They are good at martial arts. They committed crimes outside and had no choice but to seek refuge in Dunhuang City. And also treated them with courtesy. Those who performed meritorious deeds were even rewarded with some older palace maids. It was not that they could not arrange more crossbowmen, but they were limited by the range. 100 people were enough. The remaining 900 cavalrymen were stationed at both ends of the street. 3 cavalrymen were side by side. In one round of charge, 20 cavalrymen were sent out from the east and west, led by a military officer with good martial arts. After the cavalrymen died in battle, waves of arrows were shot down from the roofs, not giving the demon a chance to breathe. The next batch of cavalrymen would stop firing their crossbows and recover their arm strength. There is a very important point. In addition to the 500 Jianghu cavalry of the giant immortal palace, there are more than 30 Jianghu soldiers. They are specifically targeted at the Wulin people who committed crimes in Dunhuang City. These people are not good at cavalry fighting, so ants secretly scattered them into the assault team. Each time there are 2 or 3 people waiting for an opportunity to assassinate. There is also a group of them on the roofs. They are allowed to retreat. In this way, in the 6th cavalry charge, the demon died of exhaustion and was trampled into a pile of mud by the horse's hooves. Su Fengyin nodded and said, "This is very similar to the time when our Bailiang army fought against the Sword Emperor of Shishu who guarded the country's gate with only one sword. It was a 2-pronged attack by the cavalry and the men of sacrifice, alternating between light and dark. In addition, the imperial uncle was also determined to die. That was why the entire Jianghu was bitterly disappointed. Last time, Shinmen Cottage was short of a rank 1 master and their cooperation was not good enough. There were too few archers and they could not cause any substantial damage. Otherwise, I would not have been able to leave the mountain so easily. I'm very curious as to how the 9 swords of the Wu family defeated the Beimang's 10,000 cavalry 200 years ago. Are there any secret records in Dunhuang?" Sweet Potato smiled and said, "Auntie is a martial arts fanatic. Aside from her collection of weapons, she also has a few obscure secret manuals. She also likes to comment on the martial artists of the world. She writes them all down on paper, but I'm not really interested in them. I'll bring them out for you later." Su Fengyin joked, "Don't worry, I won't be leaving Dunhuang for a while. I want to see how a city operates, so there's no need to hide this matter." Sweet Potato hugged Su Fengyin's arm. That lump of weight was really shocking. She smiled and said, "I wouldn't dare to fool you." Su Fengyin sighed and said, "This place is really like the Imperial Palace. I wonder what the biggest palace in the world looks like. If I had known, I would have asked Chao Zhangqing, who had entered the royal capital on his 4th attempt." Sweet Potato smiled and said, "There are palace maids and eunuchs here, but there aren't many, only a few hundred. It can't be compared to the Imperial Palace of Great Peace City. Great Peace City has a human cat Han Diaosi who fought to the death with Chao Changqing 3 times. He's really a weirdo among eunuchs. In my giant immortal palace, the eunuchs are all useless, but the palace maids are all good-looking. Auntie used to be sisters with a secret concubine sect leader from the 4th of the 5 big sects, Princess Tomb. This sect is the biggest demonic sect in Beimang. They have a lot of women and are very good at bewitching men. They take yang to nourish yin, and the women they train are all peerless. Giant Immortal Palace's Dunhuang Flying Immortal Dance was born from Princess Tomb. Would you like to see it? I've only heard of countless men going crazy after seeing it, but I've never heard of anyone who could make an old monk into a bodhisattva. That's why there's a saying about the dance of longevity. It means that whoever can be as unmoving as a mountain can be considered to have achieved longevity. Unfortunately, compared to Princess Tomb's dance of longevity, The Dunhuang flying immortal dance only has 30 to 40% of its essence. Su Fengyin said straightforwardly, "It'll be a waste if I don't see it. Even if there's no way to achieve longevity, it'll be good for the eyes." Sweet Potato smiled sweetly, and there wasn't any bitterness or coldness in the depths of her eyes. This was her cleverness and intelligence. Su Fengyin hugged her waist and leaped onto the high wall. They skimmed all the way until they chose the roof of a majestic palace on the central axis of Dunhuang City and lay down. Beside them was the corner of the eaves. After letting go, they looked up at the bright moon above their heads. Su Fengyin pointed and said softly, "When I was young, I asked people if there were immortals living on the moon. I asked everyone around me and the answers were different. My mother said there were. As long as one ascended, they could live in the sky." Su Xiao wasn't serious. He also said there were. He even said that if it rained, it was the immortals' piss. Thunder was fart and hail was excrement. At that time, whenever it rained, I didn't dare to go out. Second sister was the same as Master Li Yishan. They didn't believe in ghosts and gods, so they both said there were no immortals. Eldest sister liked to argue with second sister, but she insisted that there were immortals. One time during the Mid-Autumn Festival, she was angry with second sister. She hugged me and said that when she died, she would definitely watch me from the moon with her mother. She even deliberately said to second sister that she didn't believe in immortals and that she wouldn't be able to see her two younger brothers if she died. Second sister was so angry that she almost hit her. To be honest, I didn't understand why my two sisters always quarreled. At that time, I didn't know anything and liked to fan the flames. I was happy to see them glare at each other and puff their cheeks. You also know how proud second sister is. Only this kind of trivial family matter can make her angry. Whatever military affairs, national affairs or worldly affairs, she calculates them as if they were playing chess. It was because she was indifferent that she was invincible. I remember that every time we had a snowball fight, I was with her. It was called Grant. She tossed us around like we were marching into a war. We always returned victorious, but she never got tired of it. Once, I secretly stuffed a small snowball into the back of her collar. She chased me around half of the prince's mansion. Su Xiao didn't have the code of brotherhood and was just foolishly laughing. After second sister tidied me up, I chased after Su Xiao and killed half of the prince's mansion to vent my anger. Now that I think about it, how many fathers in the world are as sullen as Su Xiao? None, right? With such a disappointing son like me, it's already good enough that he didn't die from anger. After I turned 20, I didn't want to pursue any imperial ambitions. I only wanted to do two things well, to practice martial arts and to avenge my mother with my own hands. To command an army and give Su Xiao a lighter burden in his later years. Sweet Potato held Su Fengyin's slightly cold hand and didn't say anything to comfort him. Su Fengyin shook his head and laughed. "It's good that he really ascended. I'm willing to believe in the one who rides the bull." Sweet Potato laughed softly. "I heard that Hong Shixiang is the reincarnation of Ancestor Lu. Then young master, you're the most powerful person in the world. You've beaten up Ancestor Lu's immortals and often at that." Su Fengyin smiled. Sweet Potato turned sideways, one hand supporting her cheek, and two fingers of her other hand stroking her young master's eyelashes. She said softly, "Young master, your eyelashes are really long. I used to dream of touching them." Su Fengyin didn't stop her little action. He said, "Sweet Potato, when I leave Dunhuang, you also go back to Beiliang. Don't be a death warrior pawn. Be my concubine in the future." Su Xiao will also agree. He's good at one thing, and that's that he doesn't ask about anyone's background. Even Lu Qingyin, the woman from the Green Party, can do it. Can't you? Sweet Potato shook her head. This might be the first time in her life that she didn't agree. Su Fengyin turned around and frowned. Sweet Potato, who seemed weak but was unusually stubborn in her bones, blinked her eyes. "How can a concubine like a marionette kill people?" Su Fengyin said unhappily, "You like killing people?" She nodded without hesitation. Su Fengyin stared. Sweet Potato hid in his arms and whispered, "Young master, do you like to be a prince of Beiliang just for show?" Su Fengyin sighed and said, "Putting yourself in my shoes, I understand the reason. But can't you let me be unreasonable?" Sweet Potato curled up in his arms like a kitten. "It's Sweet Potato who is unreasonable. I should listen to everything master says." Su Fengyin didn't say anything. Suddenly his eyes lit up. He narrowed his eyes, which would make any woman envious. He patted Sweet Potato's round buttocks and ordered, "Sit on me." After Sweet Potato sat on him, she looked confused and shy. She whispered, "Young master, do you want to do it here?" Su Fengyin said fiercely, "What do you think?" You know, Auntie said that I'm 70 to 80% similar to the Beimang Empress when she was young. She took off her skirt and whispered in his ear, "Young master, there's a dragon throne in the hall. Tomorrow I'll wear the dragon robe and go there." Chapter 538. A fledgling young swordsman met a newly minted female swordsman. In the end, he suffered a crushing defeat and could only beg the female swordsman to spare his life. After sending Sweet Potato back to rest, Su Fengyin did not expect to be able to do that kind of thing on the dragon throne in the palace in the next few days. Women had just broken out of their melons, so to have sex every day would be too ungentlemanly. Su Fengyin returned to the roof of the palace alone and sat in a daze. During this time he nurtured his sword in Xianlei. After that he dripped his blood on the spring plum blossoms. After dawn, the morning glow slowly bloomed on the eastern horizon. Su Fengyin looked at the magnificent scene above the 9 heavens. At this moment, the melodious morning bell of the giant fairy palace rang out. For some reason, perhaps because the battle on Jianghu Peak had vented all his anger, Su Fengyin felt a surge of noble spirit in his chest. The flow of his qi was much faster than usual, especially when he stood up and saw with his own eyes that the morning glow between heaven and earth moved from east to west. When the ray of morning glow fell before his eyes, Su Fengyin sat cross-legged. His flying sword was exposed from his sleeves, and the flying sword aura exploded. This flying sword, which was only of average quality among the 12 flying swords, flew out of his hand and spun happily without control. It was like a monster in a fantasy. After hundreds of years of arduous cultivation, it was enlightened in a single day. The sword embryo was complete. There was a sword coming from the east. Su Fengyin was wild with joy. He had worn out his iron shoes in vain, only to find what he was looking for without any effort. Immediately he did not need any qi to guide him. With a thought, the flying sword, Morning Dew, flashed and disappeared. Wherever his heart pointed, the sword would follow. After teasing for a long time, Su Fengyin's mind was filled with an unworthy thought. Damn it, I can finally nurture one less sword. Su Fengyin was not in a hurry to put away his sword. He quietly sat where he was and watched the Morning Dew's flight path. His eyes gradually revealed an expression of shock. He tightly pursed his lips and gnashed his teeth. What a dong tai. The wonder of the flying sword does not lie in the flying sword itself. It does not even nurture the sword. It lies in the hidden sword technique. Su Fengyin self-deprecatingly said, "If I had said it earlier, given my personality, I would have definitely racked my brain to find a shortcut. It's better not to say it." Su Fengyin raised his smiling face. His 5 fingers flipped and the flying sword circled around him. He looked like a delicate and naive girl who had just experienced her first awakening of love. The more Su Fengyin watched, the more he wanted to laugh. This was probably the joy of practicing martial arts. On the path of martial arts, the heavens would not let down those who worked hard. If there were some more opportunities, there would be all kinds of glimmers of hope. There would be a pleasant surprise of jumping out of the well. Su Fengyin put the Morning Dew back into his sword pouch and jumped off the roof. He walked through the Purple Gold Palace and returned to Qingqiuzhai. Using the only memory he had before he started practicing blade martial arts, he clearly recognized the layout of the palace courtyard from above. He would not get lost. Perhaps because of Sweet Potato's words, some of the palace maids and eunuchs who had woken up early to work were very respectful. Although they did not kneel, they still stood with their heads lowered, not daring to take a second look. Seeing her leaning against the courtyard door waiting for his return, Su Fengyin was somewhat absent-minded. Sweet Potato said softly, "Young master, I have already prepared a bowl of plain porridge and a few side dishes according to your taste." Su Fengyin tapped her forehead. "Don't you know some ways to maintain your health? Don't you know how to slack off?" Sweet Potato smiled. "That is the life of the young ladies. I can't envy them and I don't like it either. Being exposed to the wind will make you cold. Being exposed to the sun will make you heatstroke. Crying after reading a few lines of palace-made poetry is not the temperament of our Bailiang women." Su Fengyin finished his breakfast. In today's world, the rich usually ate 3 meals while the poor ate 2. As for those who were qualified to raise palace maids and eunuchs, they were no longer wealthy in the ordinary sense. In this way, Sweet Potato, who could wear a dragon robe and play the role of an empress, was indeed much more wealthy than the young ladies. She single-handedly controlled the life and death of 70 to 80,000 people in Dunhuang City. In the end, when it came to Su Fengyin, she was still a maidservant. Su Fengyin really couldn't find anything to be discontent about. He came to the study room that was like being in the Bailiang Palace in Wudangen. The large red sandalwood table was filled with secret files that Sweet Potato had brought over and her aunt's handwritten handwriting. Su Fengyin saw a brass scroll painting. He glanced at Sweet Potato, who was standing beside him and grinding with her sleeves rolled up. He saw the corners of her mouth curl up. He opened it to take a look. As expected, it was a portrait that was obviously drawn by a court painter. She wore a bright phoenix crown and had the posture of a mother model. Su Fengyin went back and forth between the painting and Sweet Potato several times. He clicked his tongue and said, "It's really similar. The shape is 70.5, and the spirit is 60. Seeing Sweet Potato's burning gaze, Su Fengyin expressionlessly waved his hand and said, "Rest for 2 days." She tilted her head and smiled. Su Fengyin slapped her buttocks and said with a smile, "Virtue. Outside of Wutangin you are unbearably wild. Wait until this young master restores his strength. Next time I will definitely make you beg for mercy." Su Fengyin didn't touch the secret manuals that martial artists yearned for even in their dreams. His Tide Listening Pavilion didn't have enough of them. Those martial artists whose innate talents weren't lacking were like housewives who couldn't cook without rice. They didn't have a great teacher to guide them, nor did they have a master to guide them through the door, nor did they have a secret manual to help them enter the room. It was indeed difficult for them to move forward. Their heroic spirit was lacking, and it was difficult for them to make a name for themselves. However, these two things weren't rare for the children of influential families. On one hand, they didn't have enough willpower, and they couldn't bear the suffering of sailing against the current. On the other hand, a large part of it was because there were too many paths leading to higher realms, to the point where they didn't know where to start. Or perhaps they went astray. If they learned all kinds of martial arts and read all the secret manuals, it would instead be difficult for them to become a grandmaster. As for Su Fengyin, who was close to Wang Xianji, he knew that he shouldn't bite off more than he could chew. As a result, he had always picked secret manuals that were beneficial to his blade technique. Now that he had Wang Xianji's blade technique manual, he was even more undistracted. Su Fengyin was working so hard because he truly felt that if he didn't put his life on the line to practice martial arts, he wouldn't be able to face the fellow who had been sloppy and thieving with him and was still carrying a wooden sword. The next time they met, once his identity was discovered, wouldn't he be chopped to death by Wenhua's wooden sword? Chapter 539. Putting down the scroll, Meng Qi flipped through Aunt Sweet Potato's handwriting. It was obvious that the handwriting was the same as the heart of a raccoon's hair and the tip of an autumn rabbit's hair. It was said that words were born from the heart, but it was not very accurate. After all, there were countless people who could write well. However, if one were to add in the type of brush used, especially those who only used one type of brush, one could roughly guess it. This woman was indeed a fierce person who competed with the current northern Ming Empress for the favor of the Empress. Although the strokes were strict and dignified in small regular script and were extremely particular about the rules and style, in terms of individual words, each stroke was as if it was carved into wood. Su Fengyin somewhat understood how she managed to teach a woman like Sweet Potato. Meng Qi slowly browsed through the handwriting. Most of the handwriting was about the famous deeds of the previous generation of Beimeng Jianghu. Just reading the handwriting was enough to make Su Fengyin applaud. Sweet Potato considerately carried a pot of green ant wine shipped from Beiyang. Su Fengyin finally saw the Battle of the Nine Swords in the Wu family sword tomb. Sweet Potato Ant also heard about it from hearsay. However, compared to ordinary people's exaggerated stories, the words of this second king of Dunhuang City were much more credible. She herself was a top martial arts master. The few hundred words she wrote shocked Su Fengyin. After reading it a few times, Su Fengyin was still not satisfied. He sighed and said, "So that's how it is." The two generations of the Wu family sword tomb 200 years ago were known as the most amazing period of the sword tomb. There were 9 sword masters. One was at the celestial state, 2 were at the Shenfinger state, 1 was at the Vajra state, and the remaining 5 were at the master level. It was conceivable that if the Wu family was given another generation, even if 1 or 2 of them died of old age, they would still be able to achieve the unprecedented achievement of 5 first grades in one martial art. Su Fengyin only heard about the 9 swords of the Wu family going to Beimeng from a guard servant. At that time, there was a swordsman in Beimeng who claimed that there was no swordsman in the Central Plains. However, Su Fengyin did not take this statement seriously. Although the Wu family had always been arrogant and looked down on all the swordsmen in the world, no matter how impulsive they would not go all out to Beimeng. He once asked Li Chungang during his travels, but the old man with a sheepskin fur coat only said that the west sword led the east, and did not explain further. Based on the content written by Aunt Sweet Potato, Su Fengnian had a rough understanding of the situation. The 9 swords against the 10,000 cavalrymen were not fighting on their own. Instead, the most powerful person, the Celestial State Sword Crown, would be the eye of the formation. The 8 of them would take turns to be the sword master and sword attendant, eventually forming a shocking sword-controlling formation. One could imagine the scene of the 10,000 cavalrymen tightly surrounding the 9 of them. The scene was bleak and bloody. Wave after wave of cavalrymen charging, in addition to thousands of flying swords decapitating the enemy. What kind of sword chi would it be? Su Fengnian exclaimed again and again. He leaned back in his chair and muttered to himself, this sword formation can only be created by a top swordsman. It's impossible to use it on the battlefield. Can it be simplified like that set of fist techniques for riding a bull? It seemed to be quite difficult. The Jianghu experts were already impatient with rules and regulations. Being a watchdog for the rich and powerful, they were only aiming for a stable martial path. Only fools would be willing to fight for their lives. However, it would be good if he could get the rough foundation of the sword formation. Where could he find it? The Wu family sword tomb? It seemed unrealistic. Would the Beimeng royal court have secret documents? Even if they did, it would be even more unrealistic. It's not something that can be exchanged with gold or silver. Sweet Potato chuckled. If young master really wants it, you can use the men of sacrifice lurking in the royal court to do it. Su Fengnian shook his head. That's not taking human lives seriously. It's not worth it. Oh, Sweet Potato replied. Su Fengnian did not even raise his head. He continued to flip through the book and said, don't think about it. You're not allowed to join in the fun. Do you hear me? Sweet Potato hummed softly in agreement. Su Fengnian raised his head and laughed angrily. Don't play dumb with me. Sweet Potato's eyes were full of flirtatiousness. She wrinkled her small and delicate nose and said very childishly, I know. In Su Fengnian's impression of her, other than scrupulously abiding by her duties as a maidservant, she was also like a meticulous sister. She was flawless and made people feel as if they were bathed in the spring breeze. The second-class maidservants in the courtyard had been with His Royal Highness for a long time. They knew that he was good-tempered, but he could be a little rascal and mischievous. Only Sweet Potato, who had never been angry or black-faced, and Blue Bird, who had a cold temperament, had never crossed the line for more than 10 years. Su Fengnian lowered his head again. As he read, he suddenly withdrew his hand as if it was scalding. Curious, Sweet Potato took a closer look. The words Tuoba came into view. She smiled knowingly. Since he had come to Beimeng, how could he avoid this bodhisattva, the martial god? Moreover, young master had a life-and-death battle with Tuoba Chunsun. The 3 pages were all about this Beimeng god of war. According to the format of the handwriting, it was accumulated several times. Almost every time Tuoba made a breakthrough, the woman, the Dunhuang city lord, would write about her insights. Su Fengnian read it over and over again tirelessly. Sweet Potato glanced at the dragon spitting out pearls engraved on the table. When it was lunchtime, she quietly left the room and quickly returned with a lunch box. Su Fengnian randomly ate his food and continued to read the 3 pages of precious words. Sweet Potato moved a chair to sit beside him. Seeing a grain of rice at the corner of his mouth, she reached out to pick it up and put it into her own mouth. Su Fengnian did not mind. He had been with Sweet Potato for many years. It could be said that she was the one who cleaned up the mess of his first youthful semen. She had always been warm to his heart. Even last night's 2 plum blossoms came naturally. What was there to be pretentious about? Sweet Potato took the lunch box and sat down. She said softly, if I die today, will young master remember me for the rest of my life? Su Fengnian calmly said, Sweet Potato, if you dare to die, I dare to forget you completely. I mean what I say. Sweet Potato's eyes reddened, but she laughed heartily and said, young master is so heartless. This chapter was dedicated to the new top scorer, Gong Ziyu. Chapter 540. After the giant immortal palace in Dunhuang was forcibly split into 2, the palace maids and eunuchs sent to the Yeting Palace seemed to have been banished to the Cold Palace. They were not welcomed. Most of these people were small characters who were neither powerful nor favored. At first, there were some people who hoped to rely on speculation to gain status, so they took the initiative to transfer from the Zijin Palace to the Yeting Palace. Later, when they saw that the mysterious new master did not show any signs of moving in, their hearts immediately turned cold. They hurriedly stuffed money and red envelopes to the Imperial Household Department, and the opportunists returned to the Zijin Palace. Now, less than 100 people were left to guard the empty 2 palaces and 4 halls. In addition to the beautiful scenery of the Yujing Garden, They could only do some chores like tending the flowers and sweeping. There was no hope for them to gain anything. A few days ago, there was a female official who was careless and caused trouble for a small commander of the Jianghu Guards cavalry. She did not dare to say anything. If it were not for the fact that the commander, who was known by the whole city for his body odor, made a slip of the tongue after drinking and spreading it to the ears of the palace master of the Zijin Palace, he might have been defiled several times. The Yujing Garden was built to imitate the imperial gardens of the Central Plains. The city of Dunhuang was built on yellow sand. Just the water supply for this garden cost a huge amount of money. One could imagine how much pressure the demon Luo Yang had brought to Dunhuang. However, for the young eunuch, whether it was the new palace master of the Zijin Palace or the chief demon of the Beimeng Palace, who had never shown his face in the Yeding Palace, they were both terrifying and unreachable figures. He hoped that he would never see them again in his life. The child's surname was Tong. He was 12 or 13 years old and looked delicate and thin. When he entered the palace last winter, he took an old eunuch as his master and changed his name to Dong Shou. His family was extremely poor. His parents were sick and his sisters were about to starve to death. Poor children took charge of the household early, but they had no land and no skills. Even if they became beggars, how much food could they get back home? At that time, the child, who was only 9 years old, gritted his teeth and followed the method he had heard by accident. He was bleeding and fainted in the snow outside the northern gate of Xidigarba's original wish. He was seen by the old eunuch who went out of the palace to buy ingredients. He went back to the Ministry of Internal Affairs to plead for him. After much persuasion, the old eunuch used all the favors that he had carefully accumulated in his life to bring this poor child into the palace to be a young eunuch. Unexpectedly, the eunuch was not clean and only recovered after lying in bed for 3 months. He was then taken to the torture room to be cleansed again. The child almost did not make it through that winter. Fortunately, the old eunuch had some spare money and spent it on the child's upbringing. However, the old eunuch had no power, no influence, and no cliques. Dong Shou was originally doing odd jobs in the Purple Gold Palace's Imperial View Garden, so he naturally could not go to the Purple Gold Palace to earn money. Fortunately, the expenses in the palace were not high, and he could still send some of his salary out of the palace to his family. During this period of time, some of his salary would naturally be deducted by the eunuchs who had changed hands. The young eunuch Dong Shou was also content and did not have any complaints. He heard that his family had sold a younger sister, but his salary would be enough to support the entire family. Dong Shou only felt a little guilty. He thought that when he was successful in the future, he would endure 5 or 6 years to become a small leader and then save money to redeem his sister. The older young eunuchs in the Yeding Palace liked to tease him. The rules in the palace were strict and there were not many eunuchs. Other than working hard and conscientiously, they had no fun. They gathered in groups to gamble and gossip. Once they were discovered, they would be beaten to death. Moreover, the Yeding Palace was sparsely populated. It was like being raised by a stepmother. It was especially lifeless. The young eunuchs, who were naughty and mischievous, would play with the helpless Dong Shou from time to time. They did not dare to do it openly. Usually, like today, they would call him to the shadows of the Yujing Garden, take off his pants and step on him. 5 or 6 young eunuchs laughed and left. Dong Shou silently put on his pants and patted the dust away. He leaned against the rockery and gasped in pain. The rockery behind him was called Dui Chun Mountain. His master said that it was made of stones found from the spring deity lake in the Dongyue dynasty. There were precious trees planted on the mountain that were evergreen all year round, so it was called Dui Chun Mountain. The stone path under his feet was inlaid with various colored cobblestones to form the 3 characters of Fu, Lu, and Shou. He only knew these 3 characters now. He estimated that he would be like this for the rest of his life. At most, he would add the character Dong in his name. He originally wanted to ask his master how to write the character Tong in his surname. The old eunuch coldly said that since he had entered the palace, he should not remember these useless things. After that, Dong Shou gave up and began to completely regard himself as a member of the palace. Dong Shou walked a few steps and could not bear the pain. He bent down to rest for a while. Thinking that he still had to secretly cut and water some flowers and trees for his master, he endured the pain and moved forward. He suddenly stopped and saw a handsome person in purple standing at the entrance of Dui Chun Mountain. The person looked more spirited than the Jianghu guards. As for the robe, it was unimaginably beautiful and noble. Dong Shou hurriedly knelt down to pay his respects. Su Fengyan looked at this young eunuch. This was the second time he had met this young eunuch. The first time he was sitting on a tree and enjoying the scenery. He saw the youth sneaking around the garden and going to the top of Dui Chun Mountain. He looked out of the palace and secretly cried. Su Fengyan flatly said, "Don't kneel. I'm not a member of the palace." The young eunuch was stunned for a moment. His face turned pale. He hurriedly got up and grabbed the man's sleeve. He nervously said, "Hurry up and leave. If you are caught, you will be beheaded." Su Fengyan smiled and asked, "Why don't you ask someone to catch me?" Dong Shou seemed to be confused. After hesitating for a moment, he still shook his head. He realized that one of his hands might have dirted the man's sleeve. He hurriedly retracted his hand. His expression was still flustered. He lowered his voice and begged, "Hurry up and run. If you are caught, it will be too late." Su Fengyan said, "Don't worry. I am a stonemason from Yujing Garden. I am responsible for repairing Duichun Mountain. It is this rockery behind you." Dong Shou stared at him for a while. It did not seem like he was lying. He felt relieved. Su Fengyan asked, "Why were you beaten?" Dong Shou became nervous again. He instinctively stuttered, No, I was just playing with a friend." Su Fengyan sarcastically said, "Friend? A small eunuch also has a friend?" Dong Shou's face turned red and then white. He did not know what to do. Su Fengyan shook his head slightly and asked, "You are called Dong Shou? The senior eunuchs in the palace gave you a shabby name. But I guess your master is also a good-for-nothing." Dong Shou was angry for the first time. He still stuttered, You are not allowed to talk about my master like that." Su Fengyan squinted and said, "I already said it. What can you do? Hit me? I am a stonemason invited to work in the palace. Can you afford to offend me? Do you believe that your master will be kicked out of the palace and starve to death together? When the time comes, don't be called Dong Shou. Just call him Xia Si." Dong Shou suddenly cried and knelt down. He no longer stuttered. He kowtowed and said, "Dong Shou is not sensible. I offended the stonemason. You can hit me, but don't implicate my master." The small eunuch quickly kowtowed on the cobblestone floor. It happened to be the word Shou. Su Fengyan saw Sweet Potato coming over from the corner of his eye. He waved his hand to signal her not to come closer. He said slowly, "Get up. I am here to work. I won't lower myself to your level." The small eunuch still did not dare to get up. He continued to kowtow, "Stonemason is magnanimous. It is good that you beat me to vent your anger. I will only dare to get up when I have vented enough." Su Fengyan said angrily, "Get up." Not to mention the small eunuch, even Sweet Potato who was in the distance, was shocked. Dong Shou stood up timidly. He did not dare to wipe the blood off. It flowed down between his eyebrows and down his cheeks. Su Fengyan reached out to wipe it with his sleeve. The small eunuch stepped back. Seeing him frown, he did not dare to hide any more. He was afraid that all his previous efforts would be wasted and that he would anger the stonemason again. Chapter 541. After wiping away the blood stains, the two of them were momentarily speechless. Su Fengyan did his best to put on a pleasant expression. "Go do what you need to do." The young eunuch trembled as he left. After walking far away, he quietly turned around and saw the purple-clothed stonemason. Su Fengyan smiled. "I'll just walk around and take a look. Don't worry about me." Following that, Dong Shou went to prune the flowers and plants that were much more valuable than his life. When he accidentally saw the stonemason pluck a flower, he endured the fear in his heart and cried out that this was a crime punishable by execution. Then the stonemason said that he was a stonemason and that it didn't matter. As a result, Dong Shou worked for 2 hours and cried no less than 6 times. Fortunately, the Imperial View Garden occupied a large area and no one paid attention to the situation in the flowerbed. Dong Shou felt that his courage had been broken and his teeth were chattering incessantly. However, he didn't have the courage to call for someone to take this purple-clothed man away. Although the stonemason spoke lightly, he felt that if he was caught committing such a crime, he would definitely be beheaded in public. In the past 2 years, every time he saw a dying chick fall from a nest in a tree, he would grieve for a long time. How could he bear to kill a living person? Afterwards, Dong Shou was struck by lightning by the scene in front of him. The stonemason walked to the side of a brocade-clothed woman whose face couldn't be seen clearly and chatted happily. Having an affair with a female official in the palace was a crime punishable by death. Dong Shou closed his eyes and muttered, "I didn't see anything." "Nothing at all?" Su Fengyan walked back to the young eunuch and smiled. "What was your surname and given name before you entered the palace?" Dong Shou wanted to speak but hesitated. Su Fengyan waited quietly. Dong Shou lowered his head and said softly, "Tong Guan." "Guan as in money." Su Fengyan nodded and smiled. "The name is very good. Dong Shou quickly raised his head and asked in high spirits, "Really?" Su Fengyin said in all seriousness, "Really?" In Liang there was a destroyed southern Tang. There was once a great eunuch called Tong Guan. He had a great background and became the prime minister. Dong Shou was confused. Su Fengyin sat on the grass near the lake. Behind him was a beautiful field of flowers. He explained, "Normally when a man becomes the grand secretary or prime minister, he is called Gong Xiang. Actually, there is no such thing as superfluous. But that Tong Guan who shares the same name as you is too powerful. As a eunuch, he has the same authority as the prime minister. That is how the title of Gong Xiang and Gong Xiang came into existence." The young man secretly grinned, feeling very proud. Su Fengyin changed the topic and asked, "Do you know that Duichuan Mountain is the place where the Dunhuang Castellan ascended during the Double Ninth Festival?" The young eunuch said blankly, "I've never heard my master mention it." Su Fengyin smiled and said, "In the future when you miss home, you can go there and look outside the palace." The young eunuch blushed. Su Fengyin asked, "If one day you become a great eunuch, what will you do?" Dong Shou said shyly, "Send a lot of money to my parents and sister outside the palace. To show filial piety to master." "It's gone?" "I don't think so." "Tell me the truth. Kill those eunuchs who laughed at my master. Those who bullied you? Kill them all. Skin them alive and pull out their tendons." Unknowingly he revealed his thoughts. Remembering his master's teachings, the young eunuch was suddenly horrified and remorseful. He did not dare to say another word. Su Fengyin looked at the lake and said lightly, "Don't be afraid. This is what a man should say and do. I don't have time to be apologetic with a young eunuch like you." Dong Shou lowered his head and said, "Am I a man?" Su Fengyin smiled and said, "It's fine as long as you know it." The clouds were light and the wind was light. Sweet potato did not disturb them. In the next few days, Su Fengyin, in addition to reading the writings and similar records about Dunhuang, would go to Yujing Garden to get some fresh air and chat with the young eunuch when he was free. Gradually, Dong Shou was no longer reserved and timid. He became more lively and lively. The two of them chatted casually. A woman's temper is directly related to the size of her breasts. If you don't believe me, think about the situation of the palace maids around you. Isn't this the truth? Oh, it seems to be true. Then which palace maid sister do you think has the heaviest breasts? Of course it's the palace maid sister Qixue. Her face is very beautiful. Those Jianghu horsemen on duty can't take their eyes off her every time. Hey, I'm about the same, but it's just a thought. Well, there's also Sister Xiu who works in Qinruwei Palace. Her breasts might be bigger, but she's not as beautiful as Qixue. Then you like big ones? No, I think it's not good to have big breasts. It's better to have small breasts. They're so heavy that they'll burst their clothes. I feel tired for them. The face is still the most important thing. You're still young. You don't understand. Sir Stonemason, you know. Can you tell me? Why would a young eunuch like you know this? Sir, are you worried? There's food and drink. What's there to worry about? I don't think about things between men and women. In fact, I know that there are palace eunuchs and palace maids who are quite pitiful. Are they as pitiful as you? Sir, Dong Shou, you only know Sai. You're ignorant. I don't know what to say. There's nothing I can do about it. The last meeting was very short. It was at dusk. Su Fengyin said, "The matter is done. We're leaving the palace." The young eunuch didn't want to cry, but he couldn't hold back. Soon he burst into tears. Then he asked him to wait for a while. He ran away in a hurry. When he came back, he handed Su Fengyin a money bag and begged him to give it to his family outside the palace. Su Fengyin asked, "Aren't you afraid that I'll be greedy?" The young eunuch shook his head and said, "I know that Sir Stonemason isn't such a person." Su Fengyin threw the money bag back and smashed it on his face. He scolded, "What do you know? What if it's embezzled or forgotten by me? Can your family starve for a month?" Dong Shou picked up the money bag. He felt wronged and at a loss. He began to sob again. Su Fengyin touched his head and said softly, "In the future, don't trust anyone so easily. However, once you've set your mind on something, you have to do it well. Give me the money bag. I promise I'll deliver it to you." Dong Shou wiped his tears and handed over the money bag with a happy smile. Su Fengyin turned to leave. After thinking for a while, he turned around and ordered, "Go break a flower branch and bring it over." The young eunuch was conflicted. In the end, he gathered his courage and went to break a branch. Su Fengyin squatted on the ground and wrote 2 words on the ground with the branch. He raised his head. Dong Shou's voice trembled with excitement. He asked carefully, "Tong Guan?" After Su Fengyin got up, he broke the flower branch section by section and threw it into the lake. He rubbed the young eunuch's head with all his strength. The young eunuch cried and laughed. Su Fengyin walked straight away. When he turned the corner, he saw Sweet Potato standing gracefully. Sweet Potato asked softly, "Should I arrange a stable yamen for the little guy or throw him into a pot of oil and fry him?" Su Fengyin shook his head and said, "There's no rush. Let's wait for another 2 years. If his temperament hasn't changed, we'll find someone to teach him how to read and then send him to the suture depository. He'll read the secret manuals freely. Don't try too hard and spoil his growth. What happens next will depend on his own luck." Sweet Potato nodded. By the lake, the young eunuch picked up some branches near the lake and stuffed them into his sleeve. He was about to throw them into the bottomless and narrow holes on Mount Duachuan. He returned to the 2 words Tongguan, and squatted down to look at it again and again. He memorized it in his mind. When he was about to wipe it away, he still couldn't bear to do so. After thinking for a while, he took out a thorny branch and deeply carved 2 small words on his palm. He squatted there in a daze. After a long time, he came back to his senses and said, "If I had known, I would have begged my benefactor to teach me how to write the word dong." The young eunuch slapped his face hard. "Don't be ungrateful." He stood up and clenched his fists. His eyes were firm. The young man loosened his fists and looked down. He muttered, "Tong Guan. Thank you to the new top scorer and the adorable Xiao San." Chapter 542. Before 12 o'clock a.m. Chapter 2. Before 4 o'clock a.m. Chapter 3. Is there a 4th chapter? To be determined. The Zijin Palace had a temple of discipline that overlooked the entire city. The top floor was a library. Outside the building, there was a stone carving of a dragon spitting water. Sweet Potato's aunt had planted 5 crabapple trees. Su Fengyin had moved from the Qingming courtyard to the library in the Temple of Discipline for the past few days. He often stood by the window for hours. Sweet Potato could live leisurely in Wutong Garden like a koi swimming in water, but she definitely could not do so in Dunhuang. Now 70 to 80,000 people had to look up to her. She was like a young empress ruling from behind a curtain. Although she had a group of capable female officials from the Zijin Palace to help her deal with political affairs, the entanglement of Dunhuang's various powers was a mess. Everything needed her to make a final decision. Fortunately, Su Fengyin did not let her stick to his side. There was no wall in the world that did not have a crack. Even if this wall was the wall of the emperor's house, it could not be concealed. From time to time, Su Fengyin, who was secretly wandering around the palace, felt an undercurrent surging. The tendrils extended outwards and then fed back into the palace. Su Fengyin did not know if this was the norm for Giant Immortal Palace and Dunhuang. When he asked Sweet Potato, she said that Dunhuang had always been under her aunt's control. When the devil Luoyang was outside the city, Dunhuang was like a plate of loose sand. The powers that were indebted to her aunt all watched as she left the city alone and returned with heavy injuries. After Luoyang left, she did some icing on the cake. As for the common people, most of them saw it as a matter of course. You are the lord of Dunhuang City. If you don't take action, who will? If you die, it's just a change of master. If the city is breached, no matter how much Luoyang kills the innocent, 70 to 80,000 people will not be able to kill us, right? If we change masters, at the very least, everyone will suffer together. It's better than standing out and being slaughtered by the devil. Su Fengyin laughed when he heard this answer. At that time, Sweet Potato asked, if one day Beiliang's 300,000 steel cavalry failed to defend the northwestern border, and the millions of Beiliang citizens surrendered without a fight, or even surrendered to Beimang and turned against Beiliang's army, would young master's heart turn cold? Su Fengyin asked, what would you do if you were me? Sweet Potato brushed her lips with her finger and said with a smile, if this servant is like you, the king of Beiliang, and such a thing really happens, it's fine if I don't see it. If I see one, I'll kill one. Su Fengyin sighed and said, you being the master of Dunhuang City is a bit of a waste of talent. Sweet Potato mentioned that 500 li to the north of Jinxi province were the ruins of the Wu family's 9 Swords massacre of 10,000 cavalry. Su Fengyin then had the thought of leaving the city. That night, on the dragon throne in Giant Immortal Palace's main hall, she wore a dragon robe and sat high up on the dragon throne, assuming the posture of a monarch overlooking the world. If an older important official of Northern Mang's imperial tent saw this scene, they would only mistake it for the empress regaining her youth. It was late spring and the night was absurd. Fortunately, there was no morning court in Dunhuang City. Before dawn, they returned to the Qingfeng courtyard and took a bath together. Su Fengyin was helped by her to put on the Black Mountain Scholar's white robe. He carried the bookcase on his back. Sweet Potato circled the robe twice to check for flaws and fill in the gaps. She only wanted to be perfect. When she couldn't find any fault, she said with a look of pity, "You look like a scholar with a mind full of poetry and books. It's very nice, but the purple python robe is even better." Su Fengyin patted the spring and autumn sword and said softly, "Don't send me off." Sweet Potato shook her head and said, "Send him to the Gate of Wishes." When they arrived outside the gate of Xidigarba's Gate of Wishes, Sweet Potato said that she wanted to send him 10 li away. Su Fengyin said helplessly, "If you send him off like this, we'll just go straight back to Bailiang." Sweet Potato carefully groomed Su Fengyin again and asked, "You really don't want the Nightjade Lion? Even if you're afraid of being too eye-catching, you can just find a good steed to ride on. If you get impatient, you can just throw it away." Su Fengyin shook his head and said, "We still don't know who's going to take care of who. Walking is still the easiest. Once we've developed feelings for each other, I can't bear to throw it away just like that." Sweet Potato said softly, "Take care, young master." Su Fengyin nodded and said, "You should also return to Bailiang as soon as possible." "I'll still say the same thing. I don't care how important Dunhuang City is in Bailiang's plans, I want you to live well." Sweet Potato lowered her eyebrows and said, "I understand." Su Fengyin thought for a moment and continued, "Watch the little eunuch Tong Guan from the sidelines for another 2 or 3 years. After that, send him to the House of Imperial Edict. You'll have to spend more effort on this child's literacy and martial arts foundation building. You can say that you'll be free to raise him, but you can't completely ignore him and leave him to fate." Sweet Potato smiled and said, "Don't worry, young master. Dong Shou will definitely surprise Dunhuang City in the future. There are a few secret manuals in the Sutra Depository that are suitable for him to practice. He's lucky." Su Fengyin nodded and said in a low voice, "I hope there's one more person in the world who works hard. The heavens won't let him down. Let's go." Su Fengyin turned around and waved his hand with his back facing Sweet Potato, who was dressed in embroidered robes and whose sleeves were as big as hibiscus. Chapter 543. Chapter 3, Around 3 a.m. Chapter 4. Try to get there before 6 in the morning. Although Dunhuang City was built on desolate yellow sand, because it was unique within a radius of 100 li, it was worthy of being called a city of living water. There were many merchants coming in and out of the city frequently. There were no less than 5,000 to 6,000 people coming and going every day. In addition, there was the holy land of Buddhism outside the city, Saiji Buddha Cave. On the 1st and 15th day of every month, believers would go out of the city to burn incense. It was a grand scene that filled the city. Today was the last 15th day of the late spring season. If it was in the past, the main road of the South Gate would be densely packed, but today there were surprisingly few people. There were only a few hundred devout pilgrims, and none of them had brought their families with them. On both sides of the street, there were peddlers who had woken up early to shout, selling scallion pancakes, snacks and some coarse yellow incense paper. The Yuan family, which was second to none in Dunhuang City, was blind enough to run away from marriage and elope with him. The Yuan family, which was one of the wealthiest families in Dunhuang City, was magnanimous and did not pursue the matter. The beautiful woman, who was so stubborn, really did marry this out-of-the-way scholar. Her father, who was almost fuming with anger, was worried about his daughter. He was afraid that she would suffer hardships, so he secretly gave her a lot of dowry. Unexpectedly, this man was rather useless. He was talented, but he was not capable of making a name for himself. Moreover, he was neither high nor low. The big restaurant was turned into a wine shop, and in the end it became a small wine shop. The woman was disheartened. Finally, the onlookers felt very satisfied and left him. She remarried to the Duanmu family, who was well matched in social status. The husband and wife were very happy. That young master Duanmu, who had a beautiful woman in his arms, even came to the wine shop to drink. He did not bring any servants or maids with him. He was gentle and refined, showing the elegance of a scholar. It was said that he only said a few words of courtesy, saying that he had heard the wine shop man's poetry before and was very impressed by him. The woman was disheartened. Finally, the onlookers felt very satisfied and left him. She remarried to the Duanmu family, who was well matched in social status. The husband and wife were very happy. That young master Duanmu, who was sitting on a beautiful woman, even came to the wine shop to drink. He did not bring any servants or maids with him. He was gentle and refined, showing the elegance of a scholar. It was said that he only said a few words of courtesy, saying that he had heard the wine shop man's poetry before and was very impressed. The woman was disheartened. Finally, the onlookers felt very satisfied and left him. She remarried to the Duanmu family, who was well matched in social status. Later on, the woman would occasionally burn incense and enter the city of Dunhuang, but she would always ride a splendid carriage with 4 golden horses. Busybodies had never seen her lift the curtain to look at her former lover, who was in dire straits. Presumably she was really heartbroken. The man who came here to freeload the food stepped on a chair, finished a bowl of porridge and then handed another bowl over. Everyone says that people who eat other people's mouths are soft, but this guy casually lectured him. Supu, it's not that I want to criticize you, but if you sold incense here, you would have made a lot of money already. Hey, when the time comes, I'll go burn incense and pray to Buddha, and I'll get a lot of money. When Bodhisattva sees my sincerity, I guarantee that all my wishes will come true. When I'm rich, won't it be easier for me to support you? The middle-aged man with a tranquil expression took the big white bowl and filled a bowl of porridge for this one of his few friends. He shook his head and said, 3 incense sticks are enough. To worship Buddha, Dharma, and Buddhist monks, the amount of incense doesn't matter. The sloppy man who took the white bowl glared at him and said, You're so inflexible and reasonable. Your wife left because she was angry at you. Look at you, you have a silly woman who doesn't want rouge, face powder, and exotic delicacies, but is willing to suffer with you in the cold, in the sun, and in the cold together with you. You don't know how to cherish her, and you don't know how to make progress. You deserve to be laughed at and poked at behind your back. The man took a stool and sat at the door. He looked at the slightly deserted street and frowned. The sturdy man behind him was still nagging. If it weren't for the fact that my father received your prescription to save his life, he wouldn't be willing to suffer with you. You say, since you know some medical skills, it's good to be a half-baked doctor under the guise of practicing medicine to help the world. There's a shortage of doctors in Dunhuang, and a lot of people are willing to be cheated as long as you don't treat people to death. Hey, I'm talking to you, Supu. In any case, you should at least say a few words. Fine, I don't have anything to say to a taciturn person like you. Let's go, let's go. I'll take care of those wild ducks I hunted. Fairweather friends were particular about not exposing scars and not slapping faces. More icing on the cake, less providing charcoal in snowy weather. It could be seen that this person was either heartless or really treated the shabby wine shop owner as a friend. The middle-aged man suddenly asked, Why are there so few people going out of the city to burn incense today? Let me tell you, the giant immortal palace is restless today. After the battle with the great demon Luo Yang, the old city lord has already passed away and ascended to immortality. This is a fact that even a 3-year-old child knows. Now it's obvious that there's a rebellion. I'm afraid only that little girl doesn't know about it. There's news that the 500 golden guards in the Mao family's hands outside the city are about to kill their way into the city and go straight to the purple gold palace to drag that little girl down from the dragon throne. I think there's an 80 to 90% chance that this matter will succeed. A little girl in her 20s is the city lord of Dunhuang. If word gets out, it's a disgrace. The man asked, Aren't there 500 golden guards stationed outside the city? The hunter was unwilling to answer this kind of childish question. He really couldn't hold back his words, so he said, Do you think those Mao family, Duanmu Yuan, and the other clans are all blockheads? Even if you use your butt to think, you can know that these guys must have spent money to send women to the officials. Among those 500 riders, there must be a lot of guys who are not of the same mind as the palace. In addition, the 500 riders outside are going to kill their way into the city. Even a small commoner like me knows that I can't stop them. However, these are all tricks of the big shots. If they die, they die. Those who are born rich and have nothing to do with us. Just wait and see. Before long, there will definitely be golden guards rushing into the city. The middle-aged man sank into deep thought and prepared to close the shop. The hunter stepped out of the door with a gratified expression. Supu, this time you finally have some brains. You know to close the door and watch the fun. The man smiled and didn't say anything. Only after the hunter had walked far away did he whisper, Join in the fun. He saw that not long after the hunter ran back with many pilgrims in a sorry state. Only then did he close the last door. The hunter ran until he was out of breath. He hurriedly said, Why haven't you hidden yet? Quick, 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 come in. Let me hide for a while. His mother, there's a young man whose head was kicked by a donkey. He's blocking the city gate. It seems like he wants to fight the 500 riders head on. He's crazy. How many? The man asked. The hunter cursed. That young man is courting death. Just one. The man who had already taken a step forward thought for a moment and asked, Is he going to use a saber or a sword? Chapter 544. Chapter 4, around 6 o'clock in the morning. Mao Ro gritted her teeth in hatred when she saw how arrogant this young swordsman was. If it was in the past, she would have tied him up on the bed and pampered him. However, now that they were on the battlefield, she was only left with a bone-deep anger. She said the word kill several times in a row. The warhorse galloped forward like thunder. Su Fengyin did not stop rolling the dragon wall. Although he could not achieve a sword aura like Old Man Li, he had comprehended the sleeve of Azure Dragon during the battle of life and death with Tuoba Chun-sun on the grassland. His sword aura rolling the dragon wall became more and more genuine. His figure was like a fish swimming in the tide. When he met the first batch of cavalry charging, he used the spring and autumn movement to split a man and a horse in half. Then he ran horizontally, ignoring the iron spears. Relying on the surging true energy of the mirage, he had the idea of a protracted battle. He did not insist on killing people but on seeing horses. Heavy cavalry were invincible in a battle on horseback, but dismounting to fight on foot would be a burden. The charging warhorse formation was like a line of tide. When Su Fengyin broke through the tide, more than a dozen riders were thrown off their horses. Under the second wave of iron spears, they only retreated slightly before charging again. His figure was free and unfettered with sword aura. It was like the calligraphy of a painting master. Mao Ro, who was sitting high up with a spear, was gnashing her teeth. It seemed that in just a few blinks of an eye, the Mao family had invested so much effort and enough gold and silver to form a small mountain. Almost 20 people had died. Once they fell off their horses, their heads would be cut off by the scholarly swordsman's sword aura, or their armor would be torn apart by his sword aura. They would die without a complete corpse. It was as if her muscles were being cut off. She really wanted to stomp on that handsome little bastard's crotch and ask, "Do you know that it's easy for this old lady to raise these armored cavalry as if they're my own sons? Is it easy?" Mao Ro quickly calmed down. Let alone killing one person with 500 cavalrymen, even if 300 cavalrymen went up against a first-stage Vajra realm martial artist, the latter would most likely be exhausted to death. However, there was an important prerequisite for this. After 100 or 200 people died, the formation wouldn't be messed up, and their courage wouldn't be shattered. They wouldn't be defeated and scattered. Mao Ro had a lot of confidence in this point. These 500 cavalrymen of the Jianghu guards were equivalent to Mao's personal guards. She had trained them for 1,000 days and attached great importance to actual combat and reward and punishment. She often took them out to kill bandits and horse thieves. Against the former, light cavalry and light cavalry, the latter, heavy cavalry and light cavalry, mixed together to kill. Every time they returned from a successful mission, not to mention wine and meat, as long as they dared to fight with their lives on the line, Mao Ro had the courage to spend money to invite those courtesans from the brothels in Dunhuang to the barracks and reward them. Frustrated, Mao Ro let out a long breath and said viciously, "You little swordsman, after you die, I will stomp your body into meat paste with my iron hooves." Mao Ro shouted, "Don't give him a chance to breathe, use the horse to ram him to death. Whoever stabs him first, I will reward him with all the courtesans in the city and let him play with them for 3 days and 3 nights until all 3 of your legs go soft. Whoever stabs him to death first, I will personally go into battle and give that lucky bastard a blowjob." The eyes of the Jianghu guards were bloodshot. Su Fengyin was expressionless. He controlled his sword with one hand to take the head and the other hand to kill the enemy at close range. Mao Ro looked at the soul-stirring one-sided slaughter on the battlefield and sneered, "Pull back 30 steps and throw your spears. Pick them up and come back later." The semicircular cavalry formation tangled with Su Fengyin immediately retreated. The second wave of cavalry threw out their spears in an instant. These spears were not as easy to deflect as arrows from 100 steps away. To be able to become a heavy cavalry, one's physical strength was not ordinary. Thus, every shot could be said to be powerful and heavy. Su Fengyin did not stop moving his sword and cut into the enemy's formation. He held 2 spears that brushed past his shoulders and spun them in his hands. The 2 spears were like mirror-like round shields, deflecting all the spears that came close to him. After a wave of throwing, Su Fengyin held his spear and threw it back with both hands. Immediately, 2 cavalry soldiers fell off their horses. Their armor was penetrating. Mao Ro was shocked. At this point she was actually starting to feel numb. She ordered coldly, "Surround him." This vicious and merciless female general sneered in a low voice, "I don't believe you can do what the Wu family did 200 years ago. How can one person create a sword formation?" Mao Ro glanced at the 5 cavalry captains beside her and tilted her chin. The 5 cavalrymen began to quietly charge forward with their spears. 60 cavalrymen in a circle tried their best to avoid the terrifying flying sword. Then they threw their spears at the same time from 30 steps away. Su Fengyan's hands formed a circle. Unexpectedly, the spears and spears rotated with it. His left hand brushed past, and 60 spears and spears shot out in the opposite direction. Although these heavy cavalrymen were slower than the light cavalrymen when they were stationary, they were not straw mats. Apart from a dozen or so large arrows that were too tricky and pierced the cavalrymen to death, the rest were only scratched or deflected. However, the innermost layer of the circle began to show signs of breaking. In an instant, 6 cavalry captains who had reached the top of the Golden Guards rushed out from the gap and threw their spears and spears at the same time. One of them had half his face cut off by the spring and autumn flying sword and fell off his horse. The second horse still fiercely rammed into the terrifying swordsman's chest. Unexpectedly, the swordsman only slid back a few steps and stopped his body. Fortunately, one of the cavalrymen rammed into him from the side and sent him flying. Another officer seized this rare opportunity and chopped down with his saber. Finally, there was blood. This group of Golden Guards who had been fighting until now almost had tears of joy in their eyes. The valiant officer who had chopped down the scholarly swordsman's shoulder felt his heart burn. Just as he was about to push all his energy into his saber and cut off the young swordsman's arm, he saw a pair of emotionless feminine eyes. In the next moment, his saber was knocked away and he was pulled off his horse. His neck was twisted with both hands. Su Fengyan threw down the bloody head and body. The corner of his mouth twitched. Mao Ro said in a deep voice, "Officer Tang Kong died in battle. The compensation is 50 taels of gold. His son is allowed to enter the Mao family's private school to study. After he turns 20, he will immediately enter the Golden Guards and take up the position of officer." The Mao family's promise. This was a golden signboard that was heavier than gold and silver. This was also the foundation that allowed the Mao family to maintain a high position of power in Dunhuang City. The morale of the army was once again raised. Su Fengyan held the spring and autumn sword and began to run in a straight line toward the Mao family woman who gave the order. The half-formed golden thread and the perfected morning dew finally came out of the sword pouch. Wherever they went, beads of blood bloomed from the necks of the cavalrymen on both sides. Mao Ro narrowed her eyes. This time she did not retreat. Chapter 545. Chapter 4. Sweet Potato, who was standing outside the palace gate, had her clothes fluttering in the wind. Her eyes were wet and red and her fingers were like hooks. She seemed to have turned into a demon. Even when her aunt died, she wasn't like this. A middle-aged man carrying a familiar book box appeared out of nowhere and shook his head at her. Sweet Potato's clothes gradually stopped moving. On the battlefield, everyone saw the man in red smile and then said, "Don't worry, I didn't kill all 500 Jianghu guards. I only killed 200 cavalry." After killing Mao Ro, the 300 cavalry ran away. Just by killing 200 cavalrymen. Inside the carriage, Mao Rui's old heart was about to burst. The 500 Jianghu guards outside the city were the blood, sweat, and tears of the Mao family for several generations. After Mao Ro took control of the army, she stood her ground against the objections of the masses and decided that the light cavalry should be heavy cavalry. The calculations, sacrifices, and price involved in this decision were not something that could be explained in a few words. "You, who had suffered 1,000 cuts, told this old man that you killed 200 cavalry?" Mao Rui jumped out of the carriage and ran to hug his daughter's head in front of everyone. He didn't care about his face and sat on the ground and cried. Although Mao Ro was still a step away from the second-level master realm, everyone knew that it was 100 times harder for a woman to reach the second level than a man. However, as long as one stepped into the second-level threshold, the speed at which one climbed up the martial path was often shocking. Moreover, Mao Ro was the backbone of the Mao family for the next 30 years. Her death was no less painful than losing 200 cavalry or even more painful. A family, if they wanted to continue their good fortune, they still had to rely on 1 or 2 children who could stand up and support the family. How could Mao Rui, who had to send off his children, not be heartbroken? During this time, there were a few strange and playful looks from people like Lu Wu who knew the dirty inside story of Dunhuang. Mao Rui was addicted to sex and didn't care about sex. He was mocked as a fish in a book about sex. Mao Ro was over 30 years old and still hadn't married. It seemed like the father and daughter were having an affair. However, after the teasing, Lu Wu and Tao Yong tacitly looked at each other and saw the worry in each other's eyes. The anger of an ordinary man wasn't worth mentioning. However, when this martial artist was close to the first level, no one could underestimate him. Why did the Beimeng Jiao family spare no effort to hire and support these people? Wasn't it because they wanted to intimidate the weak and subdue the enemy without fighting? For a lunatic like this who was willing to fight against 500 cavalrymen for a woman, Lu Wu believed that he would be willing to give away both his wife and concubines, as long as that blood-stained young man took a liking to them. Those Wulin uncultured people who were attracted by gold and silver were already scared out of their wits. They couldn't be compared to those clans who had formed a group and wandered the Jianghu alone. If they died, they would die in vain. No one would collect their bodies. Their weapons, banknotes, and secret manuals would all be plundered. This time they entered the city to fight for riches and honor under the premise that victory was in the bag, not to be a sacrificial lamb and throw away their lives. For a moment, the 70 to 80 people who were left after fighting with the Jianghu guards became restless, thinking of retreating. Some people who were friends with each other were on guard against unfamiliar faces. They began to whisper to each other, calculating the pros and cons. Lu Wu had the demeanor of a great general. He urged his horse to rush out and asked, "Who are you?" Su Fengyan only looked at the old man who was howling in grief and said flatly, "Your name is Mao Rue. I know you." The fierce bow-bearing General Tao Yong suddenly shouted, "Careful!" At the same time, he knocked his bow and shot an arrow toward Mao Rue's head under everyone's watchful eyes. Some sharp-eyed bystanders thought that Tao Yong had lost his mind or wanted to hit someone while they were down. Little did they know that the arrow collided with something and produced a clanging sound. However, Mao Rue's head still swung back and one of his eyeballs exploded into a small ball of blood. Mao Rue let go of the woman's head and covered his eyes. His screams became more and more mournful. Tao Yong, whose eyes were red, gnashed his teeth and reminded in a deep voice, "This child can control 2 swords." Su Fengyan wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He extended a finger and twirled it. 2 swords flew around his finger like butterflies. He asked, "I'll stab him again. If you can't stop me this time, it'll be your turn next time." Tao Yong said nothing and neatly put away his iron bow. Su Fengyan easily drove his sword through Mao Rue's palm and pierced his other eyeball. He smiled and said, "Is my woman beautiful? It's a pity you won't be able to see it." He was clearly smiling, but looking at his blood-soaked red clothes and that distorted handsome face, it really made people tremble in fear. Su Fengyan was not in a hurry to kill Mao Rue. He returned his spring thunder to its scabbard and asked, "Who dares to fight with me? Even if it's a group fight, I'll fight all of you alone." This was not a joke that could make people laugh. This young man, who was originally regarded as a subordinate of the palace, was covered in blood and exuded a monstrous evil aura. There was also that almost invincible sword chi and blade intent. At this moment, countless ambitious and ruthless people of the older generation sighed with emotion. This was how a child should be. Chapter 546. At that time, outside the city, the young scholar, who could obviously control a sword, actually pulled out his saber. After killing people like they were nothing, he stabbed the saber into the mouth of Mao Rue, who was lying on the ground. He twisted the blade and twisted it, not forgetting to say to the corpse, "Who asked you to brag?" Most of the Golden Knights who still had fighting strength completely collapsed and began to flee. Su Fengyan did not chase after these stragglers. He cut off Mao Rue's head and staggered back with it. He saw a clean and elegant man standing at the city gate. Su Fengyan remained silent and was about to unsheath his spring and autumn annals. The man blocked the sword and said calmly, "I am Su Pu, an old soldier of Beiliang. Before coming to Dunhuang, I was a kamikaze soldier of my friend Li Yishan." The red-eyed Su Fengyan was slightly startled. He asked, "Su Pu, the governor of Beiliang's 12 light cavalry battalions?" The man knelt on one knee and said softly with a hoarse voice, "I am Su Pu. Greetings to His Royal Highness." In Beiliang Palace, not to mention Su Zhao's kamikaze soldiers who could not see the light of day, the old man wearing a sheepskin coat who suppressed Sir Tide Listener and the 9th blade old Huang who hid his strength, the next person was Su Pu, whom he had never met before. His identity was very special. He had once been a 3rd-rank official and had a similar position in the army as Wuxia, who had taught Qin Jibao the war immortal. The 2 men's reputations among Beiliang's 300,000 cavalrymen could be said to be on par. However, Su Pu's image was more of a scholarly general. As for why he later gave up his position and became a kamikaze soldier, it was destined to be a secret that no one knew. Su Pu's eyes were sincere and warm. He helped carry the box that had once contained the Spring Thunder Saber and smiled. "Your Highness can rest assured and adjust your breath. Although I am not as heroic as your Highness, I still have some skills left. No one will be able to disturb me as we head north." The Spring Thunder Saber had already killed nearly 200 cavalrymen after no less than 60 swings. It was trembling in its master's hands. It was clearly at its limit. Su Fengyin covered his chest and calmed himself down. He asked with a frown, "Will Uncle Su's identity be exposed?" Su Pu shook his head. "It doesn't matter. According to Li Yishan's plan, Dunhuang City was to be turned upside down. I had to show my face. Even if your highness didn't make a move." Su Fengyin slowly entered the city. When he heard this he sneered, "At that time Uncle Su will collect Sweet Potato's corpse. Shed tears of sympathy?" Su Pu's expression remained unchanged as she nodded. Sensing his murderous intent, Su Pu was vaguely displeased. She didn't even try to hide it. She said bluntly, "Does your highness care so much about these matters of the heart?" Su Pu did not speak. After a long silence, they could see the eaves of the roof of the giant immortal palace. Su Fengyin seemed to be talking to himself. "If I cannot protect a woman today, even if I become king of Bailiang in the future and take over 300,000 cavalrymen, what do you think I can protect?" Su Pu laughed. 20 years. The anger that had accumulated in his heart for 20 years was swept away. He laughed until tears came out. Su Fengyin turned to look in puzzlement. Su Pu put away his expression and finally showed respect from the bottom of his heart. He said with a smile, "In the past, Li Yishan and Zhao Chongling had a dispute. Li Yishan said you could be king of Bailiang. Zhao Chongling did not agree and said Qin Jibao was enough. There is no harm in having a different surname to hold the banner." Su Fengyin's lips jerked. It was difficult for him to squeeze out a smile. If not for the fact that he did not dare to waste the 2 Diana golden pill he had taken into his stomach and kept most of its essence in his Shuquan point, it was hard to say if he would have died in this battle. He asked curiously, "Then what does Uncle Su think?" Su Pu narrowed his eyes and looked into the city. He said softly, "In Su Pu's view, if your highness chose to stand at the city gates, the chances of victory were 50-50. But after entering the city, Li Yishan won against Zhao Chongling." Su Pu suddenly said, "Li Yishan said that Wuxia would not rely on your highness because of family ties. Did your highness see him when he rushed to Beimang?" Su Fengyin's expression was dark. "Maybe I did not see him, but he saw me." At this time the scene was so silent one could hear a pin drop. No one dared to accept the challenge. At some unknown time, the Mao family and many other factions that had tried to attack Giant Immortal Palace were surrounded by other factions and had their paths of retreat blocked. Other than the Imperial Mending platform that was still calm, the Yuan family, the Duanmu family and others stopped watching. They moved out in full force. The mantis stalked the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. What marriage, what many years of friendship, what was cold without the lips, what was more practical than eliminating the power that these traitors would bring? Su Fengyin looked at the boorish men of the Jianghu and sneered. "You want silver? How much the Mao family gives you, Giant Immortal Palace will give you double. How about it?" Su Pu smiled as he put down the bookcase and started to kill people. As the governor of the 60,000 light cavalry of the Bailiang army, when had he not killed people with his own hands? Su Fengyin walked forward with his sword and blade. The situation was decided and no one dared to stop him. He walked in front of the embroidered-robed woman and raised his hand as though he was about to hit her. She had tears in her eyes and did not dodge at all. Sweet Potato hugged the red-robed man tightly. He bit his lips so hard that the blood stained his lips. Su Fengyin only reached out and pinched her cheek. He glared at her and said, "You're about to die. Do you really think I can forget you? As a servant girl, can't you let your young master have some peace of mind? Let's take a step back and say, as a woman, can't you let your man shelter you from the wind and rain?" Chapter 547. Chapter 2, around 12 o'clock in the evening. This time I got heat stroke and took a good rest. In the last few days there have been a lot of new Zhuangyuan. I will try to thank them one by the end of the month. P.S. I hope there will be more suggestions and criticism in the book review section and Tieba. I will read them all. If there is something I will correct it. If there is nothing I will encourage it. PS2. I feel like in the blink of an eye the second volume is about to reach 100 chapters. Under Sweet Potato's instruction, they followed the military book's policy of besieging the city, deliberately leaving a way out. It was obvious that Tao Yong was willing to abandon the foundation of Dunhuang. He took the lead in abandoning the Mao family, which had lost its backbone, and escaped with his trusted subordinates. The old general of Jinxi province, Lu Wu, had no choice. His whole family and his life were hanging in the city. Before he died bravely in battle, he loudly begged Sweet Potato not to cut the weeds and pull out the roots, so that his Lu family could survive. Sweet Potato ignored him. Lu Wu died with his eyes open. The Mao family's retainers were all killed in battle. It was clear that Mao Rui, father and daughter, did not have moral integrity, but in terms of raising their soldiers, they indeed had a unique ability. Su Pu slaughtered the Jianghu guards outside the palace. The remaining surviving cavalrymen were scared out of their wits. They threw away their weapons and prostrated themselves on the ground. Su Pu casually picked up an iron spear and returned confidently. He saw Sweet Potato as well as Su Fengnian, who was sitting on a bookcase to regulate his breathing and recuperate. Sweet Potato wanted to say something but hesitated. Su Fengnian laughed and said, "Dunhuang is your city, you know best the pros and cons, don't worry about me, just do what you need to do. This Uncle Su is my Shifu's best friend, you can trust him." "Greetings, Governor." Sweet Potato curled her skirt and gently performed a Wan Fu gesture. First private then official. With a stern countenance she said, "I will have to trouble Uncle Su to lead 50 cavalrymen to pursue and annihilate Tao Yong, leaving him alone to return to Orange Province. This can be considered Dunhuang City giving Murong Baoding some face. Uncle Su will lead the troops to the Imperial Mending Platform. You don't have to do anything." Su Pu accepted the order and left. A few old eunuchs and female officials from the Palace of Purple Gold who were lucky enough to survive also followed behind this strange middle-aged man. With a few words, Su Pu roped in 50 to 60 golden knights who wanted to atone for their crimes and charged toward the Imperial Mending Platform that was either wavering or biding its time. Su Fengnian had been sitting on his book box the whole time to heal himself. Although he looked like he was covered in blood, he was actually only lightly injured and his external injuries were not serious. However, his meridians were severely damaged. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was able to fight against 500 cavalry alone. Although the Mao family iron cavalry lacked experts to oversee them, they still had to rely on Su Fengnian's iron fist and the promise of generous rewards to hide in the thickest part of the cavalry formation. She ordered the cavalry to launch continuous attacks, throwing spears and crossbows. Later on, she even used the method of charging dozens of cavalry at the same time. Among them, some of the cavalry captains who were slightly more powerful took advantage of the opportunity to ambush Su Fengnian. It could be said that if both sides were playing chess on the chessboard mountain, they only cared about the lives of the chess pieces and did not care about the hearts of the people. Even if Su Fengnian risked his life to kill 100 cavalry, he would still be doomed to die outside the city gate. However, when Spring and Autumn used the Sword Chi rolling wall and the Green Dragon sleeve to open the way and used the Spring Thunder Saber to stab Mao Ro to death, it was as if he had beheaded a general in an army. The Iron Cavalry's morale fell to the bottom and they could no longer gather their momentum. It was reasonable for the army to be defeated like a landslide. Even if Su Fengnian had 50 to 60% of his Great Yellow Hall realm in the initial stage of Vajra realm, he would still need to recuperate for 20 years to recover. This bloody battle was no less thrilling than the death battle with Tuoba Chunsun and the other two experts on the grassland. In the marketplace, it was like a strong young man fighting 3 men of the same age. In the eyes of the onlookers, it was very exciting. The latter was like risking his life against hundreds of children, being entangled endlessly, bitten several times, dozens of times, or even hundreds of times. It was equally hair-raising. Su Fengnian calmly looked at those Jianghu people who, after the dust had settled, looked somewhat nervous. He then looked at the sturdy old man who had fallen to the ground dead. This Dunhuang City's Lu family had originally wanted to put on a tiger that would not fall down. Before he died, he would crush his iron spear into the ground and hold it with both hands until he died. However, very quickly he was hacked down by some people's sabers and trampled over. Some astute Jianghu people fought as they walked. They approached the corpse, pretended to roll on the ground, got close to the old man's body, and with a touch, stole the jade pendant on his waist. Several people who were slow to act followed suit, rolling back and forth on Lu Wu's corpse. They did not even let go of the jade inlaid buckle, which was taken away. There was only one ox leather boot left on his feet.